Today, a federal appeals court upheld the verdict against President-elect Trump for sexually abusing author E. Jean Carroll. The three-judge panel on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit ruled that Trump did not demonstrate that the district court erred in any of the challenge rulings and that he did not show any claimed errors that affected his substantial rights to warrant a new trial. Trump is now on the hook for the $5 million judgment awarded to Carroll in 2023 after being found liable for sexually abusing her in the 1990s. Stephen Chung, chief campaign spokesperson for Trump, slammed the ruling and vowed that it will be appealed, while Carroll's attorney, Robbie Kaplan, applauded the verdict, saying in a statement that he and his client are gratified by today's decision. President-elect Trump has yet to acknowledge the verdict, but retruthed a social media post over the weekend suggesting Carroll should face jail time. And the president-elect is walking back lofty promises from the campaign trail as he prepares to retake the presidency next month. Trump said he'd end the war in Ukraine before taking office and make quick work on bringing down inflation. But now he admits those issues are difficult to solve. Joining us to discuss that and more, Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Brett, you have this article out now laying out some of the areas where Trump is toning down his promises. Let's start with Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin said last week he's ready to meet with Trump and he's open to compromise to end the war in Ukraine, but he ruled out making any territorial concessions and insisted Kyiv abandon its ambitions to join NATO. Trump's got, 3 weeks now before he takes office to get this wrapped up. Seems like that could be kind of difficult.
Yeah, certainly it seems like that promise that Trump made on the debate stage with Kamala Harris, where he said he would end this war before he even took office, is proving to be, maybe too good to be true. And obviously, we heard Trump a couple weeks ago say this Ukraine conflict might be more difficult to solve than tensions in the Middle East, which I think was sort of an acknowledgement that maybe he did overpromise a bit on the campaign trail, and now he's sort of facing the realities of bringing these two sides together and trying to find some kind of a solution to this conflict.
What about on the issue of inflation? That was another big promise he had on the campaign trail, but also admitting when it comes to things like grocery prices that once the prices go up, it's hard to get them back down.
Yeah, as another major factor, I think, in Trump's win really was, rising prices, the cost of goods and groceries in particular. This was something on the campaign trail that he told folks, watch as soon as he takes office, these prices would come down because, energy prices would come down, everything else would come down. Now, as you mentioned, he's saying in an interview that, once prices go up, it's hard sometimes to bring them all the way back down. Similarly with tariffs, where he had previously sort of shrugged off any concerns about it leading to increased prices. He's now saying in interviews that, he can't guarantee that it won't lead to increased prices if he puts tariffs on imported goods. So, just another aspect of where Trump, had this sort of very ambitious, very lofty, sort of soaring promises and rhetoric on the campaign trail. And now he's having to shift his rhetoric to sort of the realities of governing and maybe trying to reset expectations a bit.
And Trump is also heading for a showdown with conservatives over raising the debt ceiling. A little bit of a recap. Trump wanted the debt ceiling included in this government funding plan that passed before Christmas, but 38 House Republicans and all Democrats bucked Trump, and that was not included. The debt limit is expected to be reached by mid-year 2025. This is a ticking time bomb. What's the plan?
Yeah, I think it was very notable that Trump had really pushed for this and had even suggested that any lawmaker who did not vote for a debt limit increase should face a primary. And yet, ultimately the bill passed without this debt limit increase. So certainly, as you said, it sort of puts things on a collision course. It's very important because Republicans want to pass spending or they want to pass tax reform. They want to pass an extension of the tax cuts that Trump signed into law in 2017. So this is something they're going to have to deal with, as they sort of map out their legislative agenda here for the first 6 months or so of Trump's first term, is what to do about the debt ceiling, whether to extend it for a couple of years, whether to abolish it entirely. It's just sort of another thing being added to their plate now in the coming months.
I want to ask you about this plan that's been floated by Speaker Johnson and other Republicans in the House. It is to use reconciliation, which would be a party line vote, to increase the debt ceiling by $1.5 trillion in exchange for $2.5 trillion in spending cuts. Now, today, Trump offered this full-throated endorsement of Speaker Johnson. He's up for re-election in the new year. What does that mean for this plan? Is that an indication that Trump supports it?
Yeah, I think, it's hard to say whether Trump is backing this plan specifically, but I do think it's notable, his endorsement of Johnson, I think, is, certainly notable, especially just given that some Republicans have expressed skepticism about voting for Johnson, who can only afford just a couple GOP defections. Obviously Trump was frustrated from what I've been told about how Johnson handled the government spending fight and the debt ceiling increase, which didn't ultimately get passed. So this plan put forward by Johnson, I think, is something of an olive branch to kind of signal that he's looking to tackle this issue, in the coming weeks and months, certainly to sort of, soothe any concerns among Trump and his allies. So, I think Trump's endorsement maybe is more about trying to avoid a messy speaker fight than about this specific plan. But certainly, I think Johnson put out the plan with Trump in mind.
Where's that 2.5 trillion going to come from? Because Trump has made these promises not to cut Medicare, Social Security. Also want to cut taxes. No tax on tips was a big promise from the campaign trail. They also want to extend Trump's tax cuts from his first time in office. Border policy could be expensive. Where are they going to get all this money?
Yeah, the spending cuts that they keep touting are, everyone's just sort of waiting to see how exactly that will work because, to get back to what we were saying a few minutes ago, it's another example of these really lofty promises that, when you get down to sort of the nuts and bolts and the fine numbers here, it's hard to see where $2.5 trillion in savings comes from if they aren't going to, slash these Social Security programs or social safety net programs like Medicare, like Medicaid, like Social Security. There's been talk about firing government workers and saving money that way. There's been talk about, by increasing tariffs that would somehow add enough to the coffers to offset spending. So, folks are maybe trying to come up with some creative solutions, but again, it's another example of where it's really kind of unclear where that money comes from if they don't go back on some campaign promises to protect programs like Social Security and like Medicare.
Yeah, difficult needle to thread because the more you appease maybe the right flank of the party on spending, you could lose some moderate Republicans when you cut different programs that they support. And speaking of intra-Republican Party fighting, it's the tech billionaires versus the MAGA hardliners over the H-1B visa program. This program allows U.S. companies to import certain skilled workers, foreign workers, in certain industries. Elon Musk and his cohorts say it's essential to get the best talent from abroad into the country. Others, like Steve Bannon and the kind of more base of the MAGA movement, say it hurts American workers. There's been a social media war going on over the weekend, continuing in today. Trump seemed to side with Musk in this debate, saying he always liked the H-1B program, even though in 2016 he threatened to kill it. How do you see this playing out, not just on the H-1B visa issue, but also this larger fight that we might see on other issues between the tech bros and the MAGA base?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see this play out as sort of, the new Trump and sort of his new circle of advisors or the folks who are in his ear compared to, the older Trump where folks like Steve Bannon really had a tremendous amount of influence. But now you have advisors like Elon Musk, JD Vance, obviously his vice president, is close with a number of folks in Silicon Valley. He's appointed a number of Silicon Valley donors and executives to, various administration roles. And those folks are all advocating for this program, this H-1B program. Elon Musk has spoken at length about the importance of bringing skilled workers, bringing skilled immigrants to the United States, making sure that it is a place that people want to come, and making sure that the U.S. is taking sort of the best of the best. But certainly that's at odds with Trump's sort of broader rhetoric about shutting down the border, about deporting millions of immigrants, about being much more selective about who is allowed into the country. So it is setting up, I think, this battle between those two wings, as you said. Certainly, Trump has signaled he's still going to follow through on those pledges for mass deportations and building the border wall again. But when it comes to maybe more finer policy like these visa programs, it does seem like folks like Elon Musk may have his ear on this.
RFK Jr. and Dr. Oz, two of Trump's top health policy nominees, are at odds over weight loss drugs. Oz and, again, people like Musk say the drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy improve public health. RFK Jr. says it's a scam to enrich pharmaceutical companies. He says the answer to the country's obesity problems are diet and exercise. There is this Biden administration proposal to cover the drugs under Medicare and Medicaid. What will happen to that proposal under the Trump administration?
Yeah, that's certainly the proposal is definitely interesting because Dr. Oz has been nominated to run the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So certainly he would have some sway in what drugs might be covered under those plans. And obviously, if he's an advocate, that would certainly carry some weight. But I think this broader fight kind of underscores where things might be headed if RFK Jr. is confirmed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Certainly he seems to have some views that are at odds with a number of other Trump appointees, whether it's on, pharmaceuticals, big pharma, weight loss drugs, chemicals and food, even abortion. He's sort of at odds where his past statements, he's been supportive of allowing abortions. That's at odds with a number of Trump nominees. So, I think this is the first of what we can expect to be multiple fights where RFK Jr. is sort of at odds with other folks, even within the Trump administration.
The Biden administration has announced a new wave of aid for Ukraine, nearly $2.5 billion. This is the final aid package from the Biden administration before Trump takes over next month. Do you see this as an end to aid to Ukraine? Is there going to be any appetite under unified Republican control of Washington to send more money to Ukraine?
I think the expectation with this tranche of funding is that I think people are treating it as likely the last major drawdown of funding for Ukraine, of U.S. support for Ukraine. Certainly, as you mentioned, under unified GOP control in Congress and the White House, I think it's going to be difficult to get Ukraine support through both chambers of Congress and signed by President-elect Trump. He has signaled, that he wants to bring this war to an end. He wants to stop the killing on both sides. He has in the past called on Europe to do more to support Ukraine moving forward. So, I think the one question is if folks can convince President-elect Trump, both Republicans and Democrats, enough to get this past both chambers, if they can convince Trump that it's worth it to have the U.S. Being more aggressive in supporting Ukraine, then maybe there's an opening there. But for the time being, I think there's broad skepticism that there will be more aid after what President Biden announced today.
All right, that's all I got for you, Brett Samuels. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
On Sunday, the family of 39th President Jimmy Carter announced that he had passed away at his home in Plains, Georgia. The former president was best known for his work after leaving office as a humanitarian and proponent of human rights. We're taking a closer look at President Carter's life and legacy.
It's a life that had so much accomplishment and so much service, a life lived on principles of fairness and decency, and likely those principles alone are what made Jimmy Carter the 39th president. But to know the man, you need to know the boy. James Earl Carter Jr. was born October 1st, 1924 in the southwest Georgia town of Plains. The principles that would shape him were formed here.
My father was a dedicated, hard-working, down-to-earth farmer, and he was a strict racial segregationist. My mother, on the other hand, believed just the opposite. She was a registered nurse, and she treated black and white people exactly the same. This was a kind of torment or division in my life. All my neighbors, all my playmates, all my intimate companions were African-American kids.
The experience showed him life as it was in Deep South Jim Crow America. He saw firsthand the need for adequate health care and the need for civil rights and simple fairness in society. They are principles that would follow him through the Navy, through his marriage to his wife Rosalind, back home to Plains, where he continued the family business of peanut farming, and to his first venture into politics in the 60s. He became a state senator, later governor of Georgia, and even in a divided state, in a divided time, he called for everyone of all backgrounds to come together.
I say to you quite frankly that the time for racial discrimination is over.
This philosophy would lead him to venture for a higher seat.
Hi, Governor Carter from Georgia. Running for president. I want to ask you to help me next year.
Many people at the time may have thought a peanut farmer from Georgia was an odd choice for president. But as many historians note, voters were seeking integrity and honesty after the Nixon and Ford administrations. In 1977, he took office.
We must adjust to changing times and still hold to unchanging principles.
The Carter administration is known for several things. Its high point, though, came with the Camp David Accords, which resulted in a peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, one that remains in place to this day. But its low point came with the energy crisis and the Iranian Revolution and another crisis involving hostages in Tehran. He served only one term, Ronald Reagan beating him in the 1980 election. Even after he got out of the White House, though, the public service never really ended. He started the Carter Center with a focus on health care, free and fair elections worldwide, and ending human suffering. The organization credited with eradicating illness across the world and bringing peace to places that had been war-torn for ages. But back home, he started volunteering with a then little-known organization, Habitat for Humanity. All of his work throughout the decades resulted in him receiving the Nobel Peace Prize.
Ladies and gentlemen, war may sometimes be a necessary evil, but no matter how necessary, it is always evil.
All the while, even with all this work, he made his home in Plains, Georgia, a place that came to honor and love him as one of their own. A man who could be seen about town on any given day with a warm smile and a kind heart. And on an occasional Sunday, bringing a lesson to the masses at a church there. Health setbacks in recent years led to a departure from public life, but a number of significant events have happened in recent years. In February 2023, Carter entered hospice. His wife, Rosalind, died in November 2023. Carter himself celebrated his 100th birthday in October 2024. His is a life that was accomplished, a man from humble beginnings who stayed humble throughout his life, even at the highest office in the land. A man who knew what service was all about. A man who's remembered for so much.
President Biden has ordered all federal buildings to close on January 9th as a day of mourning for former President Jimmy Carter. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is recovering today after he underwent a successful prostate removal surgery on Sunday. Justice Minister Yariv Levin served as acting prime minister while Netanyahu underwent the procedure. The 75-year-old PM has had a series of health issues during recent years. Those health issues, along with the ongoing war with Hamas and trial for alleged corruption, have caused international concern over his ability to lead the country. At his trial, the prime minister boasted about 18-hour workdays and a preference for cigars. Some are concerned the grueling schedule during his more than 17 years in power could take its toll. Netanyahu's office said the surgery went well and he is fully alert. The man who led the insurgency in Syria that ousted Bashar al-Assad late last month is now saying it may take up to 4 years to hold elections in the country. Ahmed al-Sharaf, formerly known as Abu Mohammed al-Jalani, making those comments on Saudi television, explaining that the country's different factions needed time to hold political dialogue and rewrite the constitution. He says he and his group, HTS, will continue to be the de facto leadership of the country until March 1st, when he says HTS will dissolve and all of Syria's different factions will meet to establish a traditional government. Al-Shara also said he hoped to maintain strategic relations with Russia. Russia's air defense played a critical role in keeping Assad in power during the last decade. Assad has taken refuge in Russia after fleeing the country late last month. In the wake of what's being called the deadliest plane crash in South Korea in decades, the U.S. is now sending investigators to help figure out what went wrong. Sunday's fiery crash in the southern part of the country resulted in the deaths of 179 people on board and left just 2 survivors. News Nation's Rich McHugh has the latest on the investigation. We do want to warn you that some of the images are disturbing.
Hi, Drew. Yes, South Korean transportation officials are saying that the pilot sent a distress signal saying a mayday, 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 bird strike. And also local news agencies are reporting that a passenger inside the plane texted a relative also claiming that a bird had struck the plane, writing, quote, their final message, "Should I say my last words?" The mystery of what happened in those final few minutes of Jeju Airlines Flight 2216 now under investigation by U.S. officials, members of the NTSB, the FAA, and Boeing, the manufacturer of that 17-year-old plane, have all landed in South Korea. They will be listening to the audio from the black boxes, which have been recovered, and looking at the footage of the crash landing. In the video, you can see the Boeing 737 land on its belly and scrape along the tarmac. It appears neither the landing gear nor the flaps were working, and it could not stop itself from hitting the concrete wall at the end of the runway. The plane was completely destroyed. The 2 surviving crew members were in the tail of the plane, reportedly. In a statement, Boeing writes, "We are in contact with Jeju Air regarding Flight 2216 and stand ready to support them. We extend our deepest condolences to the families who lost loved ones, and our thoughts remain with the passengers and crew." As for what aviation experts are saying about this, they're saying first, if it was a bird strike, it's not clear why the landing gear in the flaps wouldn't deploy because there are backup systems to deploy them. But also what ultimately killed the passengers was hitting the concrete wall at the end of the runway. Why was it there? It houses antenna designed to guide planes in bad weather. Should they have been made more flexible so they could break more easily upon impact? These are all things that the investigators are going to be looking at in the coming days. Drew, back to you.
News Nation's Rich McHugh, thank you. South Korean authorities have requested an arrest warrant for impeached President Yoon Suk Yeol following his martial law decree on December 3rd that sparked mass protests that rocked the nation. The president claimed the move was vital due to actions by the country's liberal opposition, which he accused of controlling parliament and sympathizing with North Korea. Shortly after Yoon declared martial law, the majority of parliament voted to lift the decree. Yoon has been suspended from his position since December 14th. Authorities reportedly requested the arrest on insurrection and abuse of power charges after Yoon ignored several requests to appear for questioning. Under South Korea's constitution, police have the authority to arrest a sitting president accused of insurrection while they are still in office. Yoon's lawyer has filed a challenge with the court, claiming the warrant is not valid. A change to a key interest rate projection could have an impact on your money. The Federal Reserve shifted the expected rate of interest rate reductions for the coming years last week, meaning rates are now expected to drop more slowly than previously forecasted. In today's News Nation Political Minute, Blake Berman, host of The Hill on News Nation, breaks down the news.
So what's the future for interest rates? I'm Blake Berman, host of The Hill on News Nation. One of the primary jobs of the Federal Reserve is to set the federal funds rate, the interest rate that banks pay to borrow from each other overnight. Now, this often impacts the rates that you pay for loans like mortgages and vehicles. The Federal Reserve changed its prediction for those rates for next year. Instead of saying they might cut interest rates 4 times, they're now projecting only 2 cuts. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, calls it a new phase. President-elect Donald Trump recently said he supports Powell, but Trump will have a decision to make on whether Powell stays in 2026. Now, here's a look at where things stand right now. The average rate for mortgages currently sitting right around 7%. Average auto loans just under 9%. I'm Blake Berman, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
You can find more news and analysis from Blake and our colleagues 24/7 on News Nation. To find News Nation on your screen, go to joinnn.com. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.